All right, we have the red light on and our microphones are on. So I'm going to call today's Town Council meeting for Tuesday, September the 19th. It is 3:00 p.m. So can we get a roll call, Eddie?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Reeves.
Here.
Councilmember McKee-Kent.
Here.
Councilmember Tripp.
Here.
Vice Mayor Knight.
Here.
And Mayor Mueller.
Here. Thank you for that. And now if we could all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you. And now it's time to adopt today's agenda.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to request that we pull item 11B that we will bring back at a future council meeting.
Thank you. So with that change, can we get a motion to adopt today's agenda? We have new buttons up here. We've all practiced on how they all work. So someone's going to hit a button to make a motion, and somebody else will likely hit a button. I'm hoping somebody will hit a button. Anybody can hit the button.
No button to make a motion, just a button to vote.
I'll make the Mayor, I'll make the motion to accept today's agenda with 11B. 11B being moved to a later meeting.
Second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Now we're going to vote with our buttons. And it will show up on the screen.
Mayor, the agenda was approved unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. We just unanimously approved our agenda for the day with the one exception. Now we've rearranged an item here that we used to do this at the end, but now we are going to ask council members if they have any public service announcements.
Oh. Should I press my button?
Sure.
Always press your button.
You know, I tried to clear it, and so you'll have to tell me if. Okay. I was more prepared at the end. What I wanted.
Wait 1 second. I didn't. It didn't come up here. Just double checking.
Here we are.
All right, Councilmember Tripp.
I'm following up on an announcement that was made on Nextdoor by our deputy town clerk.
Can you move your microphone closer to you?
Yes, just to call the public's attention to an announcement that was made by our deputy town clerk on Nextdoor that the Parks and Recreation Department is interested in getting any comments on the master recreation plan. And I know many of you had input on it, and it's a very well-done document, but it's worth taking a look at. And if you have any more input on either the prioritization of your particular interest or amenity, I think it would be a very good opportunity to do that. So I just wanted to remind everybody about that.
And I'd just like to give a reminder that Yountville Days is coming up. There's going to be a fun play the night before. It's called Rosella Street, and we're looking for a couple actors. And all you have to do is show up, talk to Samantha. You know, it's going to be one dress rehearsal. I think you put a costume on, walk across the stage, and then you're in the play. So the next night. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And then that is the precursor to our Yountville Days celebration, which starts off with a parade and just giving you a little extra heads up so you can enter a float or decide to walk or do anything you want. Just call Sam and she'll make the arrangements for you. So to get in the parade. So everyone's welcome. Any other announcements? Okay, with that, let's move on. We have proclamations and recognition. I guess we'll call this a recognition. We have a new employee and Director Ferns, and Public Works is coming up to do some introductions
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor. I am John Ferns, your Public Works Director, and in a town staff of our size, it's important to recognize when we have a new member of the team. So today we wanted to announce and introduce that we have a member join our municipal operations team specific to parks maintenance, Manny Almanza. Stand up, Manny, in the back there. He's
Hi, Manny. Welcome.
Just started on 9/11 was his first day. He comes to us with 28 years of parks-specific experience from the city of St. Helena, and he's going to be working very closely with our own Leo Martinez, and they worked together for 10 years prior in St. Helena. So they are a dynamic duo that are going to maintain our parks to the standards that we all know and enjoy. And he's very approachable, very friendly, and if you see him when you're out in the parks, please strike up a conversation with him.
Welcome, Manny.
Thank you. Welcome.
Now it's time for public comment that is on anything that's not on our agenda before us today. Seeing none, I will move on. Oh, you would, okay, please come up to the microphone and give us your name.
Run, Manny, run.
I'm Jim Wilson, Napa. Thanks for having me. I've come to a number of your meetings lately because of the climate emergency and some of the activity around that's been brought to your council by council members Reeves and Trippi, and I want to thank them for doing a great job representing you on CAC. They speak up, and they're definitely involved. I want to also say that I've had a chance to go to a couple of your zoning and design review board meetings. They recently recommended ordinances to come back to you, city municipal code type business on tree protection and gas stations like we're here today to look at. But I wanted to mention that my impression is that they are eager to go. And in one instance, in this room, I think I heard a couple people say we want to be more proactive, and there's a way to work that into the motion. It turned out there was no way to put that into the motion. But my impression is that they're ready to do more. We are seriously underestimating the risks of slow decarbonization of our economy. When I read your agendas and your staff reports, I look for the reference to the climate emergency around what we're doing, and you'll see that in today's staff report and in your zoning. And
if you're going to talk about today's staff report, you'll have to. We'll have public comment on that item. So just anything that's not on our agenda today.
I'll fit it in that way. Thank you, Mayor. Can do.
All right. Thank you. Any other public? Okay. Now, time to get a motion and a second on our consent item. We have 6 items. I see Vice Mayor Knight would like to make a comment.
I just like to make a short comment before we get to this consent calendar item, and it's for item 8D, which is a resolution we're supporting for a plaque and memorial tree for former employer Susan Cole. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank the Cole family for bringing forward this request for a very warm and gracious woman, really a great lady of Yountville. And so Susan spent her teenage years growing up in Yountville and Yountville Crossroads at the family Wilson Egg Ranch next to my grandparents' egg ranch on the Crossroads, which is kind of Staggs View Lane now. And so, and when I joined the council in '97, she was the administrative assistant for the town manager then, Nancy Weiss, and so worked for the town for over 30 years. So a great lady, a great person, and it's an honor to support this resolution.
So with that, would you like to make a motion for our consent calendar?
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, and I did a request also.
Do you see anything?
I see one for Councilmember Tripp.
Yeah, we were in voting status, yeah. Eddie was ahead of us.
Yeah. Am I acknowledged here?
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on
If you could just get closer to your mic, I've got to make sure it's.
I just wanted to follow up and give my condolences to Ms. Cole's family. And the day I moved to Yountville, she was the very first person who walked across the street and said hello and told me she was the first employee in the town, which I thought, wow, that is really neat, and still living in the same location. So I'm really delighted to support this motion as well. So thank you.
And Councilmember Reeves.
Well, I had wanted to say something about this same item because when I was on the council 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, let's say, she was what I would consider the face of the town of Yountville. Everyone went to Sue for whatever they needed, and she was the person that you asked if you wanted to know about anyone, anything, or anywhere in Yountville. And she knew how to keep her own counsel. Her very most goal was to encourage and facilitate good things happening in Yountville. She was always a positive force, and I have to say, I missed her when she retired, and we will all miss her because she was an excellent employee and a town resident. So I really appreciate this memorial for her.
And Mayor, I also just want to add briefly that we're also very fortunate, I meant to say this earlier, that to have two of Susan's relatives still working for the town. Karen Cole, her daughter, has worked at the community center for many years, and now we're very fortunate to have her granddaughter, Taylor Solis, working for the Parks and Rec Department. And it's a tradition of Cole involvement in the community that will continue for many years, and I'm thankful.
Councilmember McKee Kent.
Well, I didn't have the opportunity to get to know her being the newbie here. I want to thank the family for planting a tree. There's a lot of things you can do in memoriam, and planting a tree will be with us for generations to come. Thank you.
So, Vice Mayor, were you going to make a motion?
Yes, thank you. I will make the motion. I move acceptance of the consent calendars, items 8A through F, and with a special support for 8D. And thank you.
And Councilmember Reeves.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Time buttons.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought maybe you voted for me. Thank you. I meant that in a friendly way.
So that was all five? I'm sorry, yes, okay.
The vote was 5-0.
Consent calendar passed unanimously. Thank you for that. Next item is guest presentations. There are none. And the next item, we have two public hearings today. This is the first of our two public hearings, and we will be introducing and waiving the reading of a ordinance amending the municipal code to prohibit gas or fueling stations and define those terms and findings and amendments that this is also exempt from CEQA. So with that, is there a staff report?
There is.
The Attorney Bell moving
Mayor
to the mic.
and council members, I'll be providing the staff report on this item this afternoon. So before you today is an introduction and a first reading of this ordinance. I'd like to confirm with the clerks too, there's two versions of the ordinance in the agenda packet this evening. Was one of those that went to the ZDRB? Are there any differences between the two? You don't have to answer right away. I'll continue my presentation as well on the ordinance. The ordinance went to the ZDRB for a recommendation to the council. Procedurally, that happens anytime you amend Title 17 or any other zoning ordinance, which is typically included in Title 17. ZDRB can then recommend adoption, amendment, or non-adoption of the ordinance. ZDRB reviewed this at a notice public hearing, just like the notice public hearing you're having here today, and recommended adoption of the ordinance. There's one piece of this that is not included. The substantive amendment here is under subdivision C number 3. Section 3 of your ordinance, which amends section 17.12.010. And C3 is the substantive change, just what's underlined in the ordinance that's before you. There is a missing date there. I would recommend before you introduce this afternoon that date, should the council choose to move forward, that date be October 19th. That's approximately 30 days from now, and right before the ordinance would take effect if there's a second reading at your next meeting. So a little bit of background on this ordinance. The town has what's referred to as permissive zoning. There are different ways to set up a zoning code. The town has permissive zoning, meaning that if the use is not allowed or conditionally allowed in a zone, it is presumed to be prohibited. And so you go to the particular zone for that parcel. There are certain uses that are allowed by right, meaning as long as you get a building permit over the counter, you can use the property for that. And some are conditionally permitted, meaning they require a use permit from the ZDRB or from the town council before you can use the property for that use. But if the use is not listed anywhere in any of the zones, it's presumed to be prohibited because you have that permissive zoning provision at the top of the zoning code, Title 17. So gas stations and fueling stations are not specifically listed in your zoning code and historically have not been. Of course, you do have one here in town. And there are some uses that, notwithstanding your permissive zoning code, that you have specifically called out as prohibited. Examples are short-term rental unit, which you call out very specifically as prohibited, and then other uses that are prohibited by state or federal law. This ordinance would add gas stations or fueling stations to that relatively short list of expressly prohibited things. So there are some things that you expressly prohibit even though you have a permissive zoning ordinance. So you kind of do it both ways, but the prohibitions are relatively few in comparison to all the other permitted uses that are allowed in the zoning code. The upshot to prohibiting something is it's clear, it's in the zoning code that it's prohibited, it's in writing there and clear to everyone who's there. Permissive zoning prohibits things by implication, so you have to sort of determine that it's not in there. On the other hand, you've already got a code that prohibits this because it's not allowed anywhere within your zoning code. So just gave you both sides of that coin. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you proceed tonight, this will come back for a second reading. If it's adopted at the second reading, it will take effect 30 days after that.
All right, thank you very much. So now we'll go with council questions, and we'll have a couple rounds of those. Councilmember Tripp.
I realize.
Can you move your microphone? Just move it up, and that way you can hear it on the TV set. Good.
My question, Gary, is both the intent and then the language. I think the intent was that the existing legal non-conforming use of the gas station in Yountville would continue, and subsection 3 says that. It does say subject to non-conforming use provisions set forth in 17.2.3.2. My question is, would that allow, should some modification be required for whatever reason, a regulatory modification? You know, the state says you got to have your pumps X number of feet away from each other. Would that referenced non-conforming use provisions allow you to make those changes? I guess that's my question. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. So those provisions apply to all non-conforming buildings and all non-conforming uses in town, and there are some. So over the years, as the zoning code has changed or as the building code has changed, you've had non-conforming buildings and non-conforming uses, and those exist under any zoning scheme. So 17.232 allows for maintenance of non-conforming uses, so you can do things like replace the roof and make sure that things aren't leaking and put a new door on and all the other things to keep the use as it currently exists, but generally prohibits expansion of that use. So putting in additional pumps, for example, or enlarging the building or things like that generally wouldn't be prohibited, generally would be prohibited.
Would there be an opportunity to apply, or is it a blanket prohibition? Say it became clear that for whatever reason, adding another pump made sense.
So the non-conforming use set chapter does allow an expansion with approval of a use permit to the building, I believe.
Okay.
And so there's a procedure there where they could come in and apply for a use permit, and then that's discretionary for the Zoning and Design Review Board, and then also up to the council.
Okay, so if someday vegetable fuel was to get added or something, that would be an expansion, likely, but open to another review of the legal use.
Well, under this definition, a gas station or a fuel station has to dispense gasoline, diesel, or another fossil-based fuel. So if it's some other fuel, it wouldn't be prohibited by the ordinance as it's written right now. And of course, we would look at the non-conforming chapter, whatever they were proposing, see if it fits in there. And this council could always choose to change the ordinance at any time. So just as you're adopting it this evening, you could choose to repeal this or adopt some other ordinance at any time.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a couple of questions too. So even though it's a non-conforming use, if the use is suspended for 2 years, could, under this ordinance, a use similar to this come back?
No. Yeah, so a non-conforming use, if it's truly discontinued or abandoned, I believe it's 2 years under some circumstances and 1 under other circumstances under the code, then it's abandoned and cannot be continued. It's similar to the regulations that apply to a use permit. The use permit runs with the land and continues unless the use stops and is not used for a period of time. So in this case, if that gas station, the existing one, if this ordinance were to be adopted and stay in place, were to cease operations completely for the required period of time, they would then be required to come into compliance, meaning they'd have to use a permitted or conditionally permitted use there, something other than a gas station.
Okay, so another question. Are we going to define fossil-based fuels? So, for example, like with vegetable oil, say hydrogen comes in, it definitely has a basis in fossil fuels. It just doesn't, emit the CO2. So would that then be an expansion of a use that would, for the current use permit?
So currently, well, I'll answer the first question first. Okay. We have not attempted to define fossil fuel based or fossil fuel in this ordinance. We could come up with another definition for that to carve out certain types of fuels that might come or might currently exist. So that is an option. We could go back and do that. To the extent that gas station is not providing gasoline, diesel, or another fossil fuel-based motor vehicle fuel, they could continue to do that separate from this, provided that it's allowed in that zone that they're currently in. So that could be proposed somewhere else if that's an allowed use that's there. If that answers your question.
It does, much like electricity.
Yeah.
Until we define it, could be a fuel.
Right.
And, sometimes there's green and sometimes there's non-green electricity. So
right.
That would fall under the same category. Okay, so those are kind of my questions. Any more? Body want to hit a button? Councilmember Reeves.
I just wanted to ask the clerk which ordinance was really the one we were voting on.
So they're both, I believe, based on what I'm seeing, they're both the same. Just one of them doesn't have the ordinance number, which is 23-521.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions before I open up the public hearing? Seeing none, I will now open up the public hearing. So if anybody from the public would like to come up and address us on this item, this would be the appropriate time to do that. Please come up and state your name and
Allison Bensick. Good afternoon, Yountville Town Council. My name is Allison Bensick. I'm a senior at American Canyon High School, and today I'm speaking on behalf of Napa Schools for Climate Action in support of the new ordinance to prohibit the construction of new gas stations. Throughout Napa County, we have a gas station prohibition ordinance in cities like American Canyon, Calistoga, as well as a moratorium in Napa. So during the previous Zoning and Design Review Board meeting, it was brought up that 47% of all greenhouse gas emissions generated within Yountville come from the transportation sector. And with the already ongoing climate crisis that we have previously presented to you all about, it's crucial to cut emissions now. Last year, at the request of Napa Schools for Climate Action, Yountville joined other cities, locally and around the world, by declaring a climate emergency and committed to reaching a goal of net zero climate pollution by or before 2030. Going forward, Yountville should make all of its policy decisions in support of this goal. The addition of a prohibition of new and expanding gas stations will be a notch on Yountville's belt. Our future is in your hands, and we trust that you'll continue to make the right decisions. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Anybody else like to come up?
Thank you, Council. Jim Wilson, Napa. I'm here today on behalf of my 2-year-old grandson. And I wanted to continue my thought from just a bit ago around the climate emergency that Allison referred to. This is your proclamation that goes back to last year, Emergency Declaration for Climate. And the important piece of that is 2030. And when I read your staff reports lately, I see a reference to the net zero, say, greenhouse gas pollution goal. But strangely, the critical piece of that has been omitted. And I would like to ask you to look into that, please. Why is that the case? It is a function of time. And here's my example. What we're doing here today with this ordinance is we're saying, first of all, stop, say, expanding dirty energy systems. And that is the first step we have to do. And the IEA would agree. 2 years ago, they came out and they said, no more exploration for fossil fuels, and we have to shut down everything, and we have to strand 80% of our fossil fuel assets. Too bad. But that's the math, unfortunately. And the next thing is the United Nations in the Paris Agreement says, okay, we're all going to strive for net zero climate pollution by mid-century, and we all have our various voluntary contributions to that. And so the U.S. has a pathway to 2050, China 2060, etc. At the rate that we're going today at 420 ppm CO2, for example, if we follow the Paris paradigm, we'll be at about 460, 470 ppm CO2. We're already way out of whack. And so this is the horrible picture that we see when we're looking at the hockey stick. And our job is to make that spike just a blip and hope that no one notices. And I'm saying this because I think we all need to be talking about 2030, because it's different from 2050 or 2060, hugely so. And so we have to take what we're doing here today with stopping, say, expanding, say, a dirty fossil fuel energy system, and then very, very rapidly, say, cutting 13, 14, 15% of our climate pollution per year for the next 7 years. That can be done. We know how to do it. The science and technology is there. It's a problem of political will, social acceptability, and then money. And so we're looking for leadership, effective leadership that can go hat in hand and say, help me do what I know I have to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Would anybody else like to come up and address the council during our public hearing portion? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to council for consideration. And I'd just like to start with a request for the council to consider a request to table this motion, and just briefly, and Gary, I can discuss it briefly before we bring it back for a second, correct? Okay, so the reason is that our next council meeting, I believe, is going to be the first of 3 study sessions. And that study session is primarily going to deal with the environment. So these 3 study sessions we're having on different topics will then set us up for a bigger, more very important annual event that we'll be having, which will be setting our goal setting for the council. So I think there's, it's not about this idea at all, but it's really about the process, going through, really looking at all of our possibilities, and we're going to have a lot of speakers discussing at our study session that will then come back where we can prioritize goals and possible action items at our goal setting. So that briefly is the motion I'd like to make. I would need a second before it could come back and we could debate that motion. Everybody thinking, or we don't have a...
Can you advise as to the process? If we have a thought on that, should we hold it? And it's the opportunity is just a second, right? Is that
It's
what
just, right now, just a second, and then we can come
I just want to make
back.
sure I understood.
Yeah.
Okay, because I had some thoughts, but.
Yeah, and then we can have that debate,
Okay, or discussion, yeah.
or discussion, right. But we need a second. Nobody would like to make a second? That fails, so
Mayor, I would move adoption of ordinance number 23-521, an ordinance of the town council, and waive its reading, first reading.
I can just add, it's an introduction at this meeting, and for a date to be added to C3, we had recommended initially one date, but I think November 2nd is probably the better date, because that'll be 30 days after your second reading. So I'd recommend those 2 things before moving forward with the second on that.
I'll include that in my motion.
do we, Councilmember Reeves?
I would second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, so I will bring it back for debate by the council. So, Pam, I see Councilmember Reeves, first one, you'd like to speak?
Well, I didn't push my button, I didn't think, but oh well, I can talk. I do support this measure. Partly, I feel like the natural state of government is to move so slowly as if not to notice. And part of the tabling and leaving or not approving something like this is the consequences are getting more and more severe. And I think this is a statement ordinance. It is a sort of a line in the sand, maybe you could say, that we're now going to move forward in a much more accelerated way, because that's what's needed for the environment. And I think if we don't start somewhere, we don't start. So this is a great starting point. It was suggested, it is considered all over the valley as a valid thing to do, and so I feel like Yountville should step up and support their neighbors.
Councilmember Tripp.
I also am in favor of voting on this item. My personal sense is that we need to begin taking specific actions, and I do understand the idea of moving back and looking at the whole problem with a larger lens, as the mayor suggested, but we have a very specific and doable action here. And I remember something that Steve Jobs said, which is kind of remarkable because he was kind of a revolutionary guy, but he said, never underestimate the impact of small changes in moving to the desired direction. And while this is a small change and maybe a little bit symbolic, I think it moves us in the desired direction, and I think it's easier the more steps we start taking, the more likely we will build momentum in lieu of maybe further study, which nothing against further study, but I'm thinking, especially on a countywide basis, specific actions indicate our intent to begin moving in that direction. So I would, along with the amendment that Eric suggested and that Gary said, I would support this motion.
So, Gary, do we have to make another friendly motion amendment just to be able to direct staff to define fossil-based fuel?
Yes. If the direction is to include a definition for fossil-based fuel, we need to put a little bit of thought into that and to come back with a separate ordinance for a new first reading. So that would be a different
new
motion.
first reading. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't think some amendments can be done on the fly, but I don't think that's one of them.
Okay. Any thoughts? Or accepting? I don't really want to delay it, but okay. So, Councilmember McKee can't.
Thank you. I am also in support. I agree that this is symbolic and it is in alignment when normally I think Yountville is looked at as a leader. In this case, we would be getting in line with some other significant cities within the county. I have no problem with that. I think this sets a precedent that is important. And specifically here in Yountville, since March 2022, past council members had given a direction that while this is not a normal route for us to take up a policy like this when coming from outside our organization and moving it forward, it's no surprise that we're moving in this direction. And for those that say it's kind of a nothing burger because gas stations aren't zonable anyway, why don't we think bigger? We're going to have that opportunity to do that together with the public at a workshop. And we're going to have a lot of ideas coming at that time. And for those frustrated that so much time has been given to this, I say let's move forward now so we can clear our plate and move forward with great intentions of adding more to it to make sure that we are heading off the climate emergency and showing that Yountville is ready to lead.
Vice Mayor Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. I support this ordinance. The main reason first of all, I guess I'd want to say is I'm looking forward to our conversation in October, talking about green issues, environmental issues. I think this council and with the support of the town manager and staff are really working towards policies across the board to make our community more sustainable. And this is the beginning of a conversation. I think it's an accent for us to say this is where we're heading to consider issues, to looking at our future, the environment, and the climate crisis. And so I think we should move forward with it. The practical reality is that municipal codes are living documents, and they change. And I saw an argument again from a firm or a company, a company, the California Fuels and Convenience Alliance, that said oppose this ordinance because we need gas stations someday to put hydrogen and nitrogen gas. And I think I don't think that's an argument to not move forward, because there will be places with all the stations we have, if there are changes in fuel, as the council member Tripp said, that we'll have opportunities throughout communities to change our ordinances to allow hydrogen or condensed natural gas. But I think this is a first step, and the beginning of our conversation, and I support it.
Okay, with that, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see nobody requesting to speak. So with that, Eddie, I think we're ready to vote, correct?
Mayor, all the votes are in, and these pass unanimously.
All right, so we just passed that ordinance, at least the first reading tonight unanimously. It will come back to us on November 2nd for a final reading at that time. So with that, let's move on to our second public hearing. This is also to introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance which will amend our Chapter 8.05 of the Yountville Municipal Code regarding moratoriums on new, renewed, or revised permits. So with that, I see staff coming up.
Hi. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Kendra Bruno, Code Compliance Officer for the town of Yountville. Thanks for having me here. We do have a staff report regarding this. It is a code amendment to our current existing code 8.05-100 to add a B, which would include a moratorium. May impose a moratorium, with may being outlined. The Town Council, Zoning and Design Review Board, and any other board or commission of the town and town staff may impose a moratorium on issuing new, renewed, or revised permits, licenses, entitlements, or other approvals to a responsible party pending satisfactory resolution of a notice of violation, abatement order, and or payment of an administrative citation. So to provide some examples, in both ways, a dilapidated building that has a notice of violation and has an administrative citation that's still outstanding, but they apply for a building permit to abate the issue, the town staff may approve that building permit even with the outstanding notice of violation citation. In the opposite of it, public nuisance, if you will, let's say the notice of violation has been sent for a public nuisance, public nuisance, and the property owner comes in without any sort of abatement for a building permit. The public nuisance is easily abated. Perchance, say, stagnant water of some sort, the building permit would not be approved if we put the maybe moratorium on it until that stagnant water, which could be a vector for mosquitoes or other public nuisance items, until it is abated. And so that gives the town staff the authority. In addition, ZDRB and other town council boards would have this authority as well. So really focusing on the may impose a moratorium. To provide some further background, City of Napa has this already in place in their ordinance, specifically for Zone 17, their zoning Title 17. And then the County of Napa has gone so far as to use permits. So this is in existence for their use permits. If there are any sort of compliance issues, as they oversee a lot of wineries and compliance with wineries, and they will not get a use permit if they find that they're out of compliance for at least a year.
Okay, thank you.
Some teeth, yes. And this came out of requests from residents, conversations, those coming to the podium to share their general thoughts of what's happening in the town, teeth, some additional enforcement, as well as heard from council members over the last 9 months of my duration here.
All right. Thank you very much for that report. I have a quick question for Gary, and I hope this isn't really wordsmithing. So moratoriums to me I usually get the sense that, I mean, it's temporary until it's kind of lifted. But in a way, this moratorium is more like a verb, if you will, that, it's not going to go away. It's, you cannot do this because there's a moratorium until you do that. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. So the way that this code section is written right now, this municipal code section, is that any sort of permit, license, entitlement, or any other approval, so that would include use permits, building permits, anything, the town could refuse to issue that and process it until a code violation is resolved. So it is we're going to
Could
pause
or
this.
will?
It says may, so it is permissive.
Says may. Okay, it's
It is
permissive. All right.
It's one of many code enforcement tools
Okay.
that the town would have if the council approves this. And so that process would be paused, and the town would not process it until the code enforcement matter is resolved. And that could include everything from payment of fines and penalties to actually resolving the nuisance or the code violation.
All right, so that helps. So like, if I just insert the word pause in that. Okay, I got that. Councilmember Tripp.
So my question to Kendra, I totally agree. I mean, I understand the impetus for this, where it seems natural that people get frustrated when someone is subject to a notice of violation and then is able to continue on with what they're doing. My question is about the breadth of this. I like the fact it's May, but when all of us buy houses, almost always there's something that doesn't meet current building code. It could be because the code's changed, or maybe the people did whatever. They put the air conditioner too close to the house or the fence or the gate or whatever. How would that impact this situation where then the person wants to do, say they want to just replace their furnace, something kind of innocuous, relatively innocuous? Would they not be able to get a permit, or does this give the town more ability to refuse a permit if you are in violation of some other code section? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do understand. I think there's a lot of health and safety concerns that go into consideration for any sort of building permits or issues and abatements of notices of violation. We do follow health and safety code. So if you're talking, for example, a resident has a notice of violation due to a public nuisance of materials in their driveway or something to that sort, and they're coming in for a building permit that has something to do with the health and safety of the resident itself, that supersedes any sort of public nuisance in that way. And so the may would really is what's taking place there. This right now, the example I use of like vector abatement and coming in for a building permit without abating the vector situation, I think is a pretty good example. Another example is, say, a rental registration. They have failed to register their rental. We're aware of it. We've sent them multiple notices of violations, and then they come in for a building permit to redesign their kitchen. This would allow us not to grant the building permit until the rental registration and the notices of violation has been abated.
Okay. Would you say in the instance I was talking about where there's no notice of violation about some aspect of the person's home and then they want to improve something else, that normally then would not be that's not going to be covered by this.
Correct. Okay. Yes.
And then my other question, this goes to Gary. I think the language acknowledges that I think there's some things now that have come out that you can't deny permits over, like adding an ADU because somebody, I can't remember what it is that they haven't met. Do you know what I'm referencing? So this wouldn't apply to that, right?
That's right. So there are some state laws that require that you issue permits even if there are non-conforming things on the property. So that specific provision in state law says you cannot condition an ADU permit on the correction of a non-conforming use.
Okay.
So if there was something else on the property that was non-conforming, setback, height, fence, something else, it's very typical through a process like this or similar when your staff and code enforcement officers are reviewing these to say this person's applied for something, but there's these other issues on the property, so
Right.
let's correct it at the same time. So in very limited circumstances, the state has preempted that authority, and that's one example. Generally, though, this is still a permissible way to correct the violations.
Well, my questions don't relate to the fact that I think it makes good sense. I just wanted to understand. Thank you.
Seeing no more council questions, I will open this up to public comment. Seeing nobody coming forward, I will,
Mr. Bork.
right under the wire.
Just snuck right in. I'm Michael Bork. First of all, I think it's a great idea. I was sitting back there kind of stewing over my favorite property, the one next to Vice Mayor's house, where they inappropriately and illegally tore down the historic building. My question really actually isn't. My question might be, I think that you mentioned that there could be council or ZDRB involved in making an approval, or deciding whether they may move forward with something. Is there any specific language within this that would, for example, in this case, elevate it to your decision? That's my question.
Okay, thank you. Can we have the town attorney answer that question?
Yeah, so it depends on at what level the decision is being made in the first place. So there are some decisions that are just building permits, some that are decided by the ZDRB, and some that are decided by the town council. So depending on the type of permit or entitlement that's being asked for, this would be an option that would be presented by staff and by your code enforcement staff when that came before that decision-making body.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else from the public like to make a comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the council for deliberation. So, and I see Vice Mayor Knight would like to speak.
I just have a question of clarification for the town attorney from, in terms of enforcement. So what you're saying is that basically we have ordinances that allow decisions to be made by staff, ZDRB, and council, but generally throughout the whole process, we also have an appeal, a general appeal process, don't we? If someone felt that they needed or wanted to have further discussion, they have that opportunity, I assume.
Yes. Yes. So there's an appeal process for staff decisions that goes to the ZDRB and then appeals from there to the town council. ZDRB decisions can also be appealed to the town council. Town council decisions, of course, are final. So your decisions are not appealed anyway.
You could sue.
Except for court. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
No, I'm teasing.
So there's the opportunity there for a resident that had a concern. There's a process in place.
Yeah, so if staff or the ZDRB use this section to not process a permit, there is a process under Title 17 to appeal that decision, yes.
Thank you.
So Vice Mayor, I still see your name up here. Would you like to make a motion so we can get a second in debate?
Thank you. I move adoption of ordinance number 23-522, an ordinance of the town council. And is this the motion to waive the reading? Or is this a
That's
first
right.
reading too as well? So
Yeah, to introduce and waive the reading.
introduce and waive the reading. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Reeves.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So as soon as we clear the screens, we'll see if council member can hit the button, or Councilmember Reeves, I still see your name up there, so you want to? Okay, Scott, now, see nobody waiting to talk. I'll talk. I think this is a really good ordinance. I think it is going to give us, like we always like to say, a few more tools in our toolbox. So I'm in full support. Councilmember Tripp.
I'm also in full support, and right, I think this helps stop people making an economic decision to just violate the rules. And I also really liked the staff report. I found it really helpful that you went through some of the ordinances in other locales, just because it was helpful. So thank you. It was a good report. It made me feel very comfortable about doing it.
Councilmember McKee Cant.
I support for the authority as well as the leverage it'll give town staff. Thank you.
And with that, seeing nobody else wishing to speak, so let's go ahead and vote.
The vote passed unanimously, Mayor.
Okay, so that passes unanimously. So we've just introduced and waived the first reading of this new ordinance, and it will come back like the other one on November the 2nd for finalization. All right. And with
You know,
that,
actually-
see Attorney Bell would like to make a comment.
Yeah, just one clarification on these. These will come back on October 3rd.
This will come back on October 3rd. Okay. It's administrative. Thank you very much for that. And we have removed item 11B from the agenda. So do we have any staff presentations?
Well, we still have 11A. Isn't that right?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I just crossed it off before I even, thank you very much. So 11A is also an administrative item, and we will be introducing and waiving the first reading regarding the appointment of our third in a row for the term of vice mayor. So who is giving us the staff report? Attorney Bell.
Yes. I will give a brief introduction to this to give some background on this ordinance. This came out of the council's strategic planning. As you know, you've also adopted new policies for the council and also how you run your meetings. Included within those policies is a procedure for selection of the vice mayor and the process that you all will follow for that. This does not change that procedure at all. That procedure stays in place. This is a cleanup ordinance. Your current municipal code states that the vice mayor serves for a 2-year term. Your policy now envisions a 1-year term and a process for the selection. So this cleans up the ordinance by changing it from 2 years to 1 year, in line with the policy that you've already adopted. Separately, I believe in January during your reorganization will be your first time to use the process in your policy for selecting a vice mayor for that upcoming year.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll bring it back to council for questions of the staff report. We, just so the audience knows, we spent quite a bit of time talking about this in some of our earlier meetings when we were developing the handbook. So if we don't have a lot of questions, that's maybe why. Councilmember McKee Camp.
Thank you. So this isn't a question with regards specifically to the staff report, but out of curiosity with election season being next November, how does seniority work when you have turnover in or the same council? So we know that in December, the vice mayor seat will be up for consideration, and we'll just say by council member Tripp because of seniority, and then me also being an elected official. But after that, knowing Pam is appointed, and then the 2024 election comes in, what happens at that point?
So every January during your reorganization, that the vice mayor will be selected following your procedure, and seniority is based on the number of uninterrupted years of service on the council. And so breaks in between don't count, so it's the last time you were on the council and for as long as you've been on the council for that time. And so
whether appointed or elected?
I think the appointee, that's correct. The person who is elected would be on there prior to someone who is appointed. And so we would calculate that seniority. So when that staff report comes up, we will recite the policy and explain, here's what it requires, and go through and tell you who the most senior person is.
Okay, thank you.
Question, Vice Mayor Knight.
Just for clarification, the introduction and first reading for this ordinance will allow this transition to occur this January as well. So it's not it will occur in January of 2024.
That's right. So, and we had previously talked about this at the strategic planning. There's one last piece of this. You were appointed under the old scheme for a 2-year period, and so you'll be working with the clerk to make it clear that your current term is ending in January so that you all can use the new procedure to appoint for the next year.
Oh, so you're saying in this process, since my original term predates, I would resign the position so that the policy would come into place?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Mayor, excuse me. If there's no,
I'm going to maybe see if we have any public comment. So,
Thank you.
no more questions. Let's go to the public. Does the public have any comments? I will recognize that we received one from Holly Hansen that all of the town council members received. Anybody else would like to address us on this item? I'm pretty quick at this, so better raise your hand or pop up here. So with that scene, I will bring it back to council for a motion and a second, or any, and then we'll have debate.
Ready to make a
Vice
motion.
Mayor Knight, would you like to make a motion?
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion. I move introduction and first reading of ordinance number 23-520, amending sections of the Yountville Municipal Code regarding appointment and term of the vice mayor, and waive the reading.
And Councilmember Reeves.
I'll second that one also.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further debate on this from the council? Vice Mayor Knight.
Just a quick comment that I think this is a great time. This is a great decision in our conversations this year to enact this. I think generally it's a good small d process to involve more council members if they wish to be vice mayor. I also think in our first council meetings in December, January, after an election, in the past we've had very contentious meetings appointing a vice mayor. I think this will relieve us of that tension and give every council member that has an opportunity a place to stand up and serve as the vice mayor. So I was very happy to support this conversation, and I do support this change. Thank you.
Councilmember Reeves. Your light is on. Is that a fake light? I think so. Okay. Okay. Councilmember Tripp.
I very much support this, and I wanted to thank Councilmember Knight. I'm sure he's been thinking about it longer than this, but I remember he raised this issue as something he thought was important at least a year ago, because to me personally, it avoids some unnecessary contentious discussions. It allows people to train and learn as they go along. It's fair. Everybody knows how it's going to work. And it also is a good example of Councilmember Knight's very generous disposition to put this in place and then to give up his spot a year early. So I very much appreciate that, and I think it's a really collegial thing that we're doing. So thank you.
So with that, I don't see any other council members wishing to speak. So we have a motion and a second. Time to vote.
Mayor, we're just missing your vote.
That's because when I voted, I requested to speak. So he could remove me there. I'll try the vote button.
Okay. The vote passed unanimously.
All right, there we go. So with that, we now are done. If I haven't forgotten anything, I don't think so. For moving on to staff presentation and informational reports. Do we have one?
Yeah, I have just two quick things. I wanted to thank the staff. As you noticed, there was some slight changes made to the chambers, including, and I think the buttons went pretty well tonight. So we'll keep, working through that. In addition, you can see that we reconfigured the room a little bit. I know John and his team put the railing up. You can see the department heads are now behind me. We have a staff table for presentations. So I want to thank everyone for working together to just make some slight changes, which I think improve the flow of the meeting and so forth. And then it was mentioned earlier, but I do want to highlight the fact that we will have a study session on October 3rd. Also part of the discussion about protocols or strategic planning and what was incorporated into the handbook was the desire of the council to have a less formal meeting where the community can be more interactive or engaged in terms of how we receive public comment and how we can brainstorm with the community in terms of what ideas and goals there might be before you. So we're going to do our first attempt on October 3rd. The subject matter will be environmental and health and safety initiatives. We'll start to promote that in the coming weeks, and we'll hopefully get some good ideas coming forward. The idea, which again was alluded to earlier, is that will lead into goal setting, which we intend to kick off in December, hopefully complete in January, so then that we can go into budgeting and make sure whatever goals come through the council that we're presenting to you some options through the budgeting process, which you typically see really, I think, for the first time in March or April, but there's a process to get there. So we'll start that October 3rd, and we'll test out the new format, which again gives, I think, some more liberty to the presiding officer to, I don't know that we're going to need to press buttons, but we can if you all want. That's up to you all. But clearly, if the community wants to come and be more involved, that's what we'll encourage, and we're looking forward to it. So thank you again, and thank you, staff.
All right. Thank you. No other reports from staff? Nope. Okay. With that, item 13, council external meeting reports. I've got 3. I'll move through fairly quickly. Although we didn't have a meeting, the Upper Valley Waste Management Agency, we sent out a press release because the Napa Superior Court dismissed a lawsuit against our agency. So very happy. That was ongoing for quite a while, and a lot of thanks to our agency attorney, Bell, as well. So like things getting behind us. Also, flood control. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and the flood control project, it's about 35% design. They're working with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they are evaluating, which I think is probably going to be a positive change. Part of the flood wall on the interior of it is a path that will be part of the vine trail. And when it gets close to the river, we've been asked to move the path on the river side of the flood wall instead of, moving along and looking at in some areas it's 4 feet, but in many areas it's 6 feet tall. So that will be, we'll be working with the city of Napa on that. And once that gets built, it actually will be owned by the city of Napa. So we want to make sure that their council is okay with that change. And the last update, we had a Napa LAFCO special meeting. We actually held it here in the chambers, and that was on Monday, September 11th. And it was also a workshop. One of our strategic plans is to bring back up for community-wide discussion. We did this in 2019, completed a water and wastewater municipal service review, and some of those recommendations were to start considering a county-wide water and wastewater as a whole, instead of maybe completely independent units as we have now. So those discussions are beginning. The public works managers throughout the valley have gotten together and reported that meeting as well, and they are also taking a look at it at the functional level, which will help kind of drive some of the decisions that the community might make in the future. So very excited about that. Been a long time coming on that, and that is moving forward. So those are my council meeting reports. Anybody else attend the meeting? Councilmember Reeves, your light didn't go on, but we'll work on that later.
Okay, I think the Climate Action Committee is struggling with the year of 2030, trying to send out a request for proposal for a climate action plan for the county. And I have to say that my comments were that we need to support the 2030 date, because unless we actually get how much work we have to do, we aren't going to make it to any kind of close to 2030 date. So I'm hoping that that message is correct from the council, and we just are going to have another discussion about that next week.
Any other meeting reports? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. We'll be adjourning to our special workshop on October the 3rd at 1 o'clock. Immediately following that, we're not adjourning to it. At that meeting, we'll adjourn to our council meeting, same day. It starts at 3 o'clock. So can I get a motion and a second? And we'll try the buttons one more time. As soon as you light up, I'll call you.
Wait,
She's not.
wait.
I move adjournment.
You look like you're
Wait,
voting.
wait, we're going to just work.
I'm sorry.
We want to work through the buttons. So nothing's,
Looks like it's a
Wait.
vote because
Wait,
it's
it was in
blinking.
vote mode.
okay.
Hit abstain.
So we
Has a motion been made to adjourn?
We haven't made a motion or a second yet, so I'm looking for someone, a couple people to hit their buttons so I can get a motion and a second, and then we can vote.
I've just been pushing my button.
Wait,
Yeah, Jason told me there's some meaning to both buttons flashing, but I
Yeah,
can't
but that's
remember what it
voting,
is.
Let's just do a voice vote. Can we get a motion? We have a motion by McKee Cant and a second by Knight. And now let's see if we can vote. I don't think it's going to work for me because it looks like I want to talk. So I'm done talking. So
It should be popping up, shouldn't it, for you, Mayor?
Let's
It's
try it.
flashing.
There you go.
But it's not blinking.
Pass it on.
Pushing buttons.
okay,
first
let's just everyone in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Oh, it got everybody up there.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
got everybody.
Push your button.
Yeah, don't push my buttons, please. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
It probably wouldn't be the
Thank
first
you.
time, right?